So my name's Ivan Bartolo. I work with Seafish in the regulation department. Over the last weeks and months, we've been keeping an eye on UK government advice to do with the trade in seafood and picking out the useful bits and putting it together in advice. So we put together this presentation here, 5 steps for exporting to the EU, and all of it applies if there's a no deal. The 5 steps, the first 2 steps have to do with customs. Then we'll talk about certification from a health certification point of view and from an IUU catch certificate point of view. A little bit about the label that needs to be on the seafood that you're exporting, and also a little bit about whether you need a customs agent. So the first bit, an EORI number. When we put these slides together, this was one of the main things that HMRC was telling everyone, that they needed an EORI number. Since then, HMRC has made sure that anyone who's already VAT registered automatically received a GB EORI number, a UK EORI number. So most people are covered with this now. Anyone who's not VAT registered might still have not received it yet. And what do you need it for? It's because it's the registration and identification number by which HMRC knows you. So if you go and submit an import declaration or an export declaration to HMRC, you'll need this number. Whether you're using software, most people will be using software to do this, or whether you're using a paper version. The next thing that I have here is the EU EORI number. Now, it's very unlikely that you will need an EU EORI number. So just as the UK EORI number is to deal with UK customs, the EU EORI number is to deal with customs in the member state where you're doing business. So it's only those companies who happen to be doing business with the customs of a member state. So you've got dealings with the customs office of a member state, then you will also need an EU EORI number. So that would be, for example, if you had a branch that's working out of France or Spain or some other member state. The commodity code and tariff. So as you'll be aware, once we're out of the EU and we export to Europe, Europe will be charging duties. So there are tariffs, and they will charge the importer the tariff. So it would be really probably useful for you to know what these tariffs are. At the moment, you can use the UK trade tariff, first of all, to find the commodity code that applies to the product that you're exporting. And the commodity code will have a corresponding tariff or duty rate. So for example, if you're exporting mackerel, if you're exporting fresh mackerel, that will have a particular commodity code. If it's a frozen mackerel, it will be different. If it's a fillet, it'll be different. So you need to make sure you get the absolute right commodity code, because each commodity code will have a tariff that applies only to that commodity code. If you get them wrong, you know, HMRC are not very forgiving, so it's very good to get them right straight away. HMRC will give you definitive advice. So there is actually a commodity code helpline which will help you classify your goods. It's worth remembering that if you are using the UK trade tariff tool, that has all the commodity codes there and the tariffs that apply in the EU at the moment, because they're exactly the same as the tariff that apply in the UK at the moment. So once we do leave, and if it's without a deal, then the UK trade tariff tool will give a completely different set of tariffs which apply to goods that are imported into this country. This is just an example of what those tariffs can be for the products that you're exporting. There's a range over there because, for example, the cod will be charged differently depending, as I said, on the exact presentation and the exact commodity code. Halfway down, there's mackerel landed into Norway. If you are sending stuff to Norway, it's actually, mackerel is 0 rated in Norway. But if Norway is just being used to transship it into the EU, then that tariff will apply. As you know, at the moment there are many free trade arrangements that the UK enjoys thanks to being part of the EU. There's all of these will fall away, and new ones will have to come into place. So trade arrangements typically mean that you pay 0 or very low tariffs on goods that you export or import. The UK is arranging continuity agreements with as many countries as it can. These are the ones that have already been agreed. So once the UK leaves the EU, the same tariffs and quotas will apply with these particular countries. You can see there are some quite important ones there as far as seafood goes. Iceland, Norway, Switzerland. The Andean countries includes Ecuador, if you import prawns from there. CARIFORUM, Central America includes Honduras, for example, which we import prawn from as well. South Korea, we send whelk to South Korea, so it's quite useful that there is a free trade agreement, a continuity agreement in place. Certificates. The export health certificate. So anyone who's been sending seafood to Europe hasn't had so far to produce a health certificate to go with the goods. The moment we're out in a no-deal situation, all seafood will have to have a health certificate that's going out to Europe. So it confirms that it complies with European Union health legislation. You need to get it before you export, and it must accompany the consignment. The only time you won't need a health certificate is if you are landing directly into an EU port, and if you're landing fresh fish into an EU port. It's different if it's frozen. DEFRA have been working with industry to develop ways to make things a little bit easier as far as certification goes. So there's block certification, where you can get a block of, say, 10 certificates with all the details in there, everything except the final signature by the certifying officer. And there's also a hub model being developed, I think it's very well developed in Scotland, where you can use groupage and group your goods up with other people's goods and have just one certificate for them. The catch certificate. So that was health. This has to do with the IUU regulation. So it's to prove that the fish that you're exporting to Europe has been legally caught. And Europe will demand this to accompany anything that you're sending to Europe. Well, most things are being sent to Europe. There are some exceptions, and these are listed in the IUU regulation, Regulation 1005 of 2008. And they include freshwater products, aquaculture products, and some of that shellfish that's listed over there. Not all shellfish. It's your responsibility to make sure that you complete these catch certificates, and there will be a workshop later on about how you can use the electronic system that the MMO has been developing. There are a couple of add-ons to the catch certificate that you might need to add. The storage document, which is essentially a non-manipulation document. And this has to be included if you have fish that wasn't sourced in the UK, that was stored in the UK, and you're exporting to the EU. There's also a processing statement, and this is something you will need if you have imported fish into the UK, which is not of UK origin. You've processed it, and you're sending it out to the EU. So the storage document is essentially a non-manipulation document, and a processing statement is a document that ties up your goods with the original catch certificate. Your product label.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry. Can we just start
Yeah, we can keep all questions till afterwards. As you know, everything that goes to the EU goes with an EU health mark. For seafood, it's actually called an identification mark. We have always sent it out with a UK designation. Now, once we leave the EU, if we are going to stick to EU requirements, we can't use that UK, because EU requirements are that it needs to be a 2-digit ISO code. That's the international standards. And for the UK, the ISO code is GB, so it needs to be GB. The alternative to that, if you're not comfortable with putting GB, is to put the full country name, so United Kingdom in capital letters. That will be acceptable in Europe. And these are examples of what will be accepted in Europe. If you want to use a UK, that's fine, but you won't be able to export it to Europe. It'll be fine locally, nationally in the UK. So this is what they look like. A thing about PGI. So this has to do, for example, with the London Cure smoked salmon. That's an example of a protected geographical indication. These have all been organised under EU law, and they apply throughout the EU at the moment. Now, once we leave the UK, we'll set up its own regime, its own system, which will mirror existing schemes just to keep things smooth. If you want to send stuff out to Europe, in principle, that PGI should still be accepted until Europe goes and changes their own laws about what's acceptable. At the moment, UK PGIs, once we leave as well, UK PGIs, at least in the short term, will be acceptable. But they might not continue to do it in the longer term. So you might have to reapply to the European Commission to maintain your PGI. So the last thing I want to talk about is customs broker. Many of the people who have been dealing only with Europe aren't so used to dealing with customs, so this is where using a customs broker might be quite a good idea, because a customs broker, an agent, a freight forwarder, they know all the ins and outs of how to make customs declarations, how to deal with commodity codes, how to use any special procedures that customs need to know about. So it reduces the risk of delays, it makes things a lot faster, and it also means that you don't have to have your own staff with that kind of knowledge. And it also means you don't have to get the software that talks to HMRC. On the other hand, you might want to make your own declarations. That's also possible. You need to get the approved software, as I said, and it is better suited to people who have been dealing with customs in the past. So we've gone through the 5 steps, just a couple of extra bits here. If you're landing directly into the EU, that's something I mentioned before. You need an IMO number. You need to land at a NEAFC designated port, not any port. You'll still need a catch certificate, and you need to do all this prior notification and a pre-landing declaration. As I said, you won't need a catch certificate if you're landing fresh fish. If you're landing frozen, or if you're landing fish that's been on a factory vessel, so it's processed in some way, then you will need a captain's certificate. So it's a kind of health certificate that's signed by the skipper. And of course, you'll need your catch certificate. So just to summarize again, make sure you have a point of entry into the EU. One other thing about direct landings, if it's frozen or from a factory vessel, it will have to go through a border inspection point. Agree Incoterms. Now, Incoterms are special arrangements that you can put into the contract that decides exactly who's going to be responsible for the goods and where that responsibility ends. And there is something called, for example, duty paid, delivered duty paid. So, for example, if that is there, then you are the one who's paying the duty instead of the importer. Check that if you're exporting, you're on the list of approved establishments. And it's not enough just to have an approval number. You need to tell DEFRA that you intend to export. We mentioned the EORI number, the tariff rates, which the EU is going to charge. Register on the government gateway. This is the way you can access, for example, the electronic system for drawing up the cash certificate. Find out about what the EU export health certificates look like, and also check the Seafish guidance that we have, which is preparing your business for EU exit. So thank you very much for that.